Sometimes office life feels like an endless TV series where the writers decided that drama and absurdity must go hand in hand. Honestly, there are moments when you sit and think, well, it can't get any worse, they can't possibly come up with dumber rules. And then a new manager or HR person arrives and proves you wrong. It will. And we'll even learn to love it. I'll share a few stories from my life and my colleagues' lives that show how we sometimes paid management back with their own coin. Not with shouting, not with arguments, but with a clever, subtle, almost artistic method, malicious compliance. That's when you follow the rules exactly as they are written, so literally that the entire system collapses. Let me start with the story about travel reimbursements. At that company, I often had to drive around town for meetings, sometimes even outside the county. The compensation system was super convenient, either a flat $40 a month, or, if you drove a lot, you could file detailed mileage reports. Paperwork was like a knife to my heart, so I always chose the $40. Sometimes I lost a couple of dollars, but at least I didn't spend evenings with a calculator and forms. But then a new HR manager arrived. And that's when the circus began. She decided the company was spending too much, so she canceled the flat compensation and forced everyone to file reports. You think it stopped there? Oh no. She made the process as bureaucratic as possible. We had to provide printed routes from Google Maps, explain even the tiniest details, and of course submit 2 maps, one for the trip out, one for the trip back. At first, I didn't bother. I thought, well, I'm not going to do all that for just $20 extra. But then it hit me. If the HR manager wanted maps, she'd get maps. I remembered an old site like MapQuest that printed tons of pages, ads for gas stations, motels, even diners. And instead of printing just 1 page, I printed all 5 to 6. Every report worth a few bucks turned into a 10 to 15-page stack of paper. For a 3-mile trip, I'd submit a hefty booklet. And the funny thing? My monthly reimbursements went up to $60. HR even had to hire another person just to handle the avalanche of paperwork. When I quit, as a farewell gift, I shared my templates with the entire sales team. They started drowning HR in paper too. Just imagine that manager's face. She wanted to save money, but expenses shot even higher. And the best part, we were all following the rules to the letter. That's when I realized, in fighting absurd rules, the best weapon isn't protest, but obedience taken to grotesque extremes. But you know what? That was only the beginning. It turned out that managers' pettiness is an endless source of creativity. For example, imagine a big, serious bank. Our department's job was just processing ATM checks. Dirty bags, dust, wet slips on rainy days. 0 contact with customers. And every other department could wear jeans on Fridays. Everyone except us. Our manager decided, only business attire. Ties, blouses, formal trousers. On Fridays, when other departments came in wearing jeans and t-shirts, we looked like we were heading to a funeral. So we decided, if we had to follow the dress code, we'd do it so literally that she'd regret it more than we would. I was the first to show up in an absolutely business-appropriate, but hilariously mismatched outfit, a pastel floral blouse with wide striped trousers. Everything clean, ironed, formally business style. But I looked like even a blind tailor would say, "Girl, that's too much." When the manager returned from vacation, our whole department was dressed like that. Leopard print skirts with plaid blazers, neon patterned ties, polka dot blouses with striped pants. Formally, no violations. But visually, it looked like a children's clothing factory exploded in the room. She called a meeting, tried to threaten us with disciplinary action, but I pulled out the corporate handbook and read aloud the definition of business attire. Not a single word about colors or taste. We won. A few weeks later, we were officially allowed to wear jeans. Victory, brought to you by leopard skirts and plaid ties. But the same manager decided she also wanted to track where we went during the day. So she made a board with names and columns. Time out, time back, reason. As if we weren't bank employees but elementary school kids. I was the first to write. Out to the restroom, planning urination and defecation. When I came back, the whole department had joined in. The board was filled with notes like, going to wash hands, will use soap and paper towel, out to the restroom, planning a medium-length defecation. When the manager saw this artwork, after a meeting, she was stunned. The board lasted only a few more days before disappearing forever. That's when I truly understood, sometimes managers set the trap for themselves. And all we do is politely step into it right alongside them. Do you think that was the end of the absurdity? No. Some managers are like experimental artists, always inventing new forms of nonsense. Sometimes not even out of malice, but just because of their ego. And that's when you have to turn on your imagination. Here's a story about a chair. Just an ordinary office chair at first glance. But in the world of corporate games, it became a real weapon. When my wife and I bought a house and had to live at my mother's for a few weeks, I moved some things to the office. Among them was my favorite Herman Miller Aron chair, which I had bought second-hand. It was incredibly comfortable, and I thought, why not make my workdays a little more pleasant? And what do you think happened? At first, I started noticing that in the morning my chair wasn't at my desk. It was standing in the conference room. I silently rolled it back. But then, a few days later, I saw it at our CEO's desk. Imagine that, a company of 120 people, an open space office, and suddenly my chair is proudly stationed at the main table. I quietly rolled it back again. He gave me a sideways look but said nothing. A couple of days later, his assistant, a very nice woman, approached me and said, "You know, the boss thinks it's inappropriate for you to have a higher class chair than him. It creates the wrong impression." I barely held back a laugh. I wanted to say, "The impression that I care about my back?" But instead I politely replied, "I understand. I won't participate in this conflict anymore." And indeed, that very afternoon, I carried the chair to my car. The next morning, the assistant came up again. "Where's the chair?" With a serious tone, I answered, "Since it's not suitable for the office, I put it in the car." From then on, my colleagues saw me park every day with that chair neatly sitting in the trunk. The CEO never said another word. And every morning, I got a little spark of joy when someone asked, "What's with the chair?" And I honestly answered, "Now it lives in the car." Formally, I complied. But the essence was that he wanted to assert authority, and instead ended up looking ridiculous. Another story happened at the very beginning of my teaching career. It was 2004, Florida, blistering heat. I got assigned a temporary classroom, basically a trailer where the air conditioner barely worked. The kids were sweating, and I myself felt like I might pass out any minute. I decided enough. We started holding math lessons in the school courtyard. Fresh air, shade from the trees, at least we could breathe. Of course, the administration quickly noticed. The vice principal called me in and said, "Hold classes in your assigned room." I tried to explain it was unbearable, but the only response was, "Rules are rules." Fine. I decided to act differently. That weekend I went to a store, bought a big tank, a fan, a pump, and a copper pipe. I built a primitive cooler, filled the tank with ice and water, circulated it through the pipe in front of the fan, and on Monday, at least it was somewhat breathable in the classroom. The students were thrilled. They called me the mad scientist. Lessons became more fun, and even kids who used to doze off were now wide awake. Naturally, the story spread around the school instantly. Parents called, telling stories about the physics experiment in math class. I was summoned again by the administration. I calmly replied, "You forced me to teach here. I found a solution. The problem is that the classroom is unfit for learning. I just applied basic thermodynamics. They made me dismantle the setup." But the next day, a brand new air conditioner appeared in the class. Was it a victory? Yes. Did they renew my contract? No. They said I made the school look bad. But you know what's most interesting? Many years later, my son now studies at that school. And guess what he told me? We still have those same trailers. The system doesn't change. But at least I have my own story about how I once taught kids more than I ever planned. But it's not always just about managers. Sometimes colleagues are even worse. In our team, we had one of those specialists. A man about whom Homer Simpson once said, "Everyone has to work harder when I'm around." He'd get projects, and never finish them. Assignments, and he'd vanish. He broke safety rules, misplaced equipment, and always found someone else to blame. For years we covered for him, otherwise the work would have stopped altogether. But one day he blamed us. And that's when everyone simultaneously decided, enough. We stopped covering for him. Everyone did their own job, and his mistakes stayed exposed. When he went on vacation, a colleague and I cleaned up his backlog and still managed to finish all the current tasks on time. Management was surprised. Why is everything suddenly running better than usual? When he came back, chaos returned. And within 2 weeks, he was fired. The irony was that our workload actually decreased. Because we no longer had to redo everything twice. And I thought, sometimes, to show someone's value, you just have to stop protecting them. Another incident, from my IT career. In our country, it's illegal to force employees to be on call 24/7. So we had an agreement. Someone takes the on-call shift every 2 weeks and gets about €500 a month for it. Fair pay for the mental burden, since there were maybe 2 or 3 real emergencies a year. But I wasn't on the list. Management decided, if something happens, we'll just call him. For free. The first such call came one weekend. And I decided, no. If you don't recognize me as on call, don't expect help. I changed my phone number, disconnected the old one, and gave the new one only to my partner. And then came the moment of truth. One weekend the main firewall crashed. Only my partner and I had access, but he was on vacation. They tried to reach me, but couldn't. They had to call in outside specialists. It took them 2 days, wrecked critical calculations, and cost the company a fortune. On Monday, I walked in and was immediately summoned by the boss. From now on, you're officially on the on-call list. Paperwork later. And you know what? After that, no one ever dared to call me without pay. People often asked me, was it worth it? €3,000 a year after taxes isn't that much. And I always answered, I'd give up the money just to reclaim my freedom. Personal time is worth more. But probably the funniest case happened during my army service. Imagine a tank crew. I was the gunner. There's a commander, a loader, and a driver. A good crew is like a well-oiled machine. But our driver, he was something else. He grumbled, was rude, and drove the tank so badly we nearly broke our ribs. On maintenance day, when everyone was supposed to tighten the tracks and grease the mechanisms, he refused to help me clean the barrel. He said, I don't want to see you or hear you. Fine. I found another soldier, and we did the job. The driver was left alone with the tracks. And of course, in the evening they stopped him. It was dark and dangerous. He struggled all through the next day and lost his weekend. Meanwhile, the loader, the commander, and I went off to drink coffee and laugh. Because he had punished himself. You know, all these stories taught me one simple rule. Sometimes the best answer to stupidity isn't resistance, but obedience. But the kind of obedience that turns rules into farce. When I look back on all these situations, it feels like office life isn't so much about work as it is about little battles of personality. Sometimes those battles are exhausting, sometimes infuriating, but most often they bring unexpected moments of victory. Quiet, small, but so sweet. Because in every story, the essence is the same: managers try to control everything, to force people into boxes. And we just follow the rules. But we follow them so literally that the rules start working against the very people who made them. That is the essence of true malicious compliance. I often think about that period with the travel reimbursements and reports. Why did the HR manager decide to save money at our expense? Maybe she just wanted to show off her power. Look, I made the system more efficient. But in reality, she created a waste machine. Extra HR staff, mountains of paper, endless time spent checking every page. And all this to save a few dollars. Can you imagine how many nerves we saved ourselves by turning it into a gain? I still remember that day when I first submitted a report for a 3-mile trip with 15 pages of attachments. It felt like playing chess with a very stupid opponent, making the simplest move and watching them put themselves in checkmate. And the dress code story? It became a legend in the bank. Later, even people who had never been in our department knew. Those are the folks who wore leopard skirts with polka dot ties. How stubborn did our manager have to be to demand strict business attire from people who spent all day sorting dirty ATM bags? I remember the way she looked at us that day when we all showed up in our outfits. She tried to stay serious, but her eyes betrayed her. She either wanted to scream or burst out laughing. And the funniest part? We hadn't broken a single rule. She lost on her own field. After that, I realized the most dangerous weapon against managers is their own instructions. They always expect people to fight back, argue, protest. But when you just nod quietly and do everything by the book, that's when real chaos begins. The attendance board was even funnier. I remember colleagues writing one after another. Out to the restroom, planning a quick relief; out to drink water, planning 3 sips and 2 exhales. The whole department stood by the board, chuckling like school kids. And when the manager and her colleague came by after their meeting and saw this display, their faces were priceless. The board disappeared soon after, but none of us ever forgot that day. It was the moment we felt true unity. Nothing bonds people like the shared stupidity of management. The chair, that was a story of its own. It seemed like nothing. But it became a symbol. A symbol of how managers fear even the slightest hint of inequality. The CEO was afraid that someone might think my workspace was more important than his. And instead of simply upgrading his own chair, he started a war over mine. But who looked ridiculous in the end? He, the man who fought over a chair. And me? I calmly told everyone. Yes, my chair now lives in the trunk of my car. And every day, colleagues walked past and saw it there. A small, but oh so satisfying victory. Florida and the mad scientist, that's a whole chapter of my life. That was when I realized I could really make a difference. Yes, they didn't renew my contract because I damaged the school's image. But I taught kids more than math. I showed them not to accept circumstances blindly. That even in the worst conditions, you can find a way out. I still remember one student saying, "Mr. Cobb, you're a real engineer." And although I was teaching math, I think it was then that I understood education is not just textbooks. It's also the example of how you face problems. And that irresponsible colleague? He was like a black hole. Everything that came his way disappeared without a trace. For years we covered up his mistakes until we finally realized we just had to stop. And that turned out to be the best strategy. When he was finally fired, we all breathed a sigh of relief. Work actually got easier. It was like a vaccine. Now I always know you mustn't cover for those who drag everyone down. Because then you become part of the problem yourself. The on-call IT story taught me to value personal time. Sure, money is good. But what are €3,000 a year worth if you live with constant anxiety that the phone might ring any minute? When I was finally officially added to the on-call list, what I felt wasn't joy about the money, but satisfaction with fairness. I was struck by how quickly management changed their tone once they had to pay outside specialists. While they were saving on me, it seemed like a small thing. But when they lost big money, suddenly my value was obvious. Sometimes you just have to let the system experience the consequences itself. And finally, the army case. A tank, heat, sand, dust. A crew is like a family. But sometimes one family member poisons everyone. Our driver was exactly that. And when he refused to help, he punished himself. We did the work, and he was left alone with the tracks, losing his weekend. That story taught me one thing: if someone wants to live by, it's not my problem. Sooner or later they'll learn they can't survive without others. Meanwhile, our crew grew closer. To this day, I'm still friends with the loader and the commander. As for the driver, I don't even want to remember him. All these stories are different: office, school, army. But they share a common thread. People always try to create rules they think will make this system better. And we, the workers, see that those rules are absurd. Then we're left with a choice: either suffer in silence, or find a way to turn the rules into a farce. I chose the latter. Because there's something especially satisfying in knowing you didn't break a thing, yet the system collapses under its own weight. Over time, I realized, malicious compliance isn't just a way to get revenge. It's a kind of philosophy. It teaches you that absurdity can't be defeated by force. It can only be carried to its logical conclusion, showing its true face. And there's a certain beauty in that. The beauty that even in the strictest rules, there's always a loophole. And if you're clever enough, you can turn those rules into a weapon. Those are my stories. Some will say, trivial stuff. But to me, they're like small victories. Because each one proves, even in a system where everything is decided from above, you still have a chance to win. Not with fists, not with shouting, but with brains, and a little cunning. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where a boss demands absurdity from you, just smile and say, "Sure, as you wish." Then do exactly what they asked. Just in a way that makes it worse for them than for you. Because sometimes the best weapon isn't protest. It's compliance. But compliance that turns the rules into a weapon against the people who invented them.